Welcome to the North Point Ministries podcast. This message is the third in the 6-part series, The Best Question Ever. In this message, Andy Stanley explains that every bad decision we make morally is preceded by a series of small, unwise choices. Specifically, we learn that the consequences of sexual sins not only harm us, but also those around us.
Okay, I want you to use your imagination with me this morning. Okay, you're walking across a 4-lane road, like a pretty busy highway kind of a deal, and there's a turn lane, so it's like 5 lanes, and it's an intersection, and you're with someone you love very much, and you just picture who it is. It might be a child, it might be a fiance, a spouse, boyfriend or girlfriend, maybe a younger brother or sister, but you just go ahead and pick somebody. It's the two of you, okay, and you're standing on one side, and you got to cross. You've looked both ways. Best you can tell, traffic's pretty clear. And so here you go, okay? And you cross that first lane, and you're kind of talking. And whoever you're with, they're just zoned into some kind of conversation they're having with you. They're trying to explain something to you, and you realize that they're not really paying attention to the traffic patterns. It's up to you, and everything looks clear, and you're walking across. They're just talking, and you're trying to listen, but you're also trying to make sure because there's cars. But this is the time to get across the 2 lanes one way, the turn lane, and the 2 lanes the other way. And about halfway across, all of a sudden you realize you have not timed it very well. They're not paying any attention. They're talking because they're so focused on something, and you realize that at your current rate, you're not going to make it. And you realize your only chance isn't to turn back because you don't have time to think about turning back. You got to run. And they're not paying a bit of attention because they're just telling you something that's so important. And all of a sudden, in a split second, you have to make a decision. You've got to run, and you've got to get them to run. And so you say with as much intensity as possible, what do you say? Yeah, you don't say, let me explain something a second. Okay, see, I thought, but I didn't think so. No. You don't say, now, according to the current velocity of the... No. Okay? You don't even interrupt and say, excuse me for being rude, but I need... No. What do you say? Now I want us to just all say it together. Ready? Oh, that was good. I mean, there's no time for an explanation because you see what they don't see and they don't see what you see. And when you get to the other side, you can explain and you can apologize and you may startle them, you may scare them, you may freak them out. But what are you going to say? Let me hear it one more time. You're going to say, that was good. It's good. Today, this message is basically that. So let's close in prayer and call it short. And we're in this series. We're in this series, Foolproof. We're in the 3rd part, and we've said basically all of us have done some dumb stuff, some things that we look back on and go, "Why in the world did I move in with her? Why did I move in with him? Why did I go there? Why did I get involved? Why did I marry her? Why did I marry him? Why did I marry somebody just like him the second time around? Why did I lease that? Why did I buy that? Why did I take that job? Why did I move? Why? How could I have been so dumb?" And our greatest regrets are generally things looking back. Something in our hearts says, we should have known better. We watch other people make similar decisions and we think they ought to know better. Why can't they see it? It's so obvious. But what wasn't obvious to us years ago, in some cases months ago, isn't obvious to them either. And so consequently, we have things we regret. At the same time, we said if there's a God who loves us, and if there's a God who says, I've got a future for you, and I don't want you to repeat history, it would make sense that this God would give us some insight as to how to keep from having those kinds of regrets. How to live a regret-less life, or to regret-proof our life. Or as we've said in this series, to fool-proof our life. And we said, in fact, he has, because he's given us the best question of all. A question that doesn't say, what's the good thing to do, or the right thing to do, or the moral thing to do, or the permissible thing to do, or what does culture tell us to do, or what's everybody else doing, or what did I do last time? But to ask the best question of all, and the best question of all is this. What does it say with me? What is the... Very good. Everybody together, what is the wise thing to do? In light of my past experience, my current circumstances, my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing? And this is the key, not for everybody else to do. Because you see, I have a unique blend of past. And I have a unique blend of current responsibilities and circumstances. And then I have a unique blend of hopes and dreams for my life and my finances and my family and my marriage and everything else. I have a unique past, present, and future. And you blend all those things together, I've got a pretty unique package. And so it's not a matter of what is the wise thing for you to do, because that may be different than it is for me. But what is the wise thing for me to do? And we've said that the greatest thing we could do is to begin to ask that question at every single layer and at every single level of our life. Every invitation, every opportunity, every potential relationship. What is the wise thing for me to do? And in asking that question, we potentially foolproof our life. You can live a life from this point on with very few, if any, regrets. But the problem is that's a very threatening question, because that's a question that forces us to see and acknowledge that we've been deceiving ourselves. And we are all experts, aren't we? We are experts at deceiving ourselves. But you begin to ask the question, what is the wise thing to do? And you see through your own smoke screen. And I see through my own compromise. And we begin to see that on one hand, we're saying we want the best for our life. On one hand, I really want this preferred future. But the truth is, I have created an environment where I can fool myself into doing things that eventually steal from me, that you steal from yourself what you ultimately want in the future. Now, today, for a few minutes, I want to take that question, what is the wise thing to do? And I want to focus it on one arena of your life. In fact, I think there are three key arenas of life that we can ask this question, the three most important ones. One is our time. You know, how do you deal with time is the wise thing. Money, what's the wise thing to do with our money? But this third one I want to talk about, which is probably the most important one, is the area of morality. That is, as you think about your morality, your sexuality, the decisions you make in terms of what's right and wrong morally, to begin to ask the question, what is the wise thing to do, is an incredibly powerful question in that arena, because here's what I know about you and here's what you know about me. All of us have made moral decisions that we regret. They may have been extreme, they may have been not too extreme. It may have been back in high school, it may have been, last night. All of us have made decisions in terms of relationships we got into, things we looked at, things we filled our minds with, and we would say, you know what? I've crossed some lines morally I wish I'd never crossed. I've gone too far. I've gotten too involved. I did things, said things, hugged people, kissed people with people that I had no business. And Andy, you would say, those are some of my biggest regrets. And the reason this wisdom issue is so important is this, don't miss this. Because the decisions you made that were wrong morally, in other words, every time you did something wrong morally, before you made the wrong moral decision, you made a series of unwise decisions. That all of your wrong decisions morally were introduced by a series of unwise decisions. And the way that you blitz through all those barriers and all those red flags that were saying, that's not wise, that's not wise, that's not wise, that's not wise. The way you got through that is the same way we all get through it. You say, yeah, but there's nothing wrong with this. 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 Oh, how did I get into this mess? Oh, God help me. I'll never do it again. Because here's the deal. Every wrong decision you've ever made morally, and I'm not even telling you what's moral. In your mind somewhere, there's a line. All of us have a line. Wherever that line is for you, wherever you've made wrong moral decisions, all of those wrong moral decisions, you led up to those by making a series of unwise decisions. And your unwise decisions set you up for moral failure. Whether it's something you filled your mind with, somebody you filled your life with, or emotionally in a relationship you got too involved with. All of those things, they may have taken us by surprise in terms of the event, but they didn't really take us by surprise in terms of the decisions we made leading up to the event, the relationship, the moment that things were too involved. Let me illustrate it. Sheila and Frank work in the same office. Frank's married, Sheila's single. Sheila's attractive. Frank notices, but hey, he's a committed husband and father and made a vow and plans to keep it. But one afternoon he thinks, hey, I could ask Sheila to go to lunch. It's professional. We'll talk about work stuff. And there's nothing wrong with eating lunch. I mean, everybody eats lunch. You got to eat lunch. Nothing wrong. We're going to eat in public restaurant. I mean, there's people all around us. Everybody's eating lunch. The preacher eats lunch. I mean, everybody's got to eat lunch. There's nothing wrong with eating lunch. We're having lunch. Nothing wrong with that. A few weeks go by and the team's working late. It's time for dinner. And he says, well, Sheila and I can have dinner. I mean, we had lunch. Nothing happened at lunch. Nothing's going to happen at dinner. Everybody eats dinner. My family eats dinner. My kids eat dinner. Everybody's got to eat dinner. I mean, what would happen to the economy if people quit eating dinner? Grocery stores and restaurants. I mean, this is a patriotic thing I'm doing here. We're going to dinner, supporting the economy, and nothing's going to happen. I mean, we're just eating dinner. If anybody walked in, I'd say, hey, this is Sheila. We're eating dinner. And Sheila's thinking he's married, but hey, it's not like, we're just having dinner, right? And then he starts telling Sheila all about what's going on with his family, and things aren't too good in the marriage. And she's thinking, well, there's nothing wrong with him confiding in me. I'm a friend. Counselors make money doing this. I'm doing this for free. I'm helping this guy out. In fact, I might have insight to help him with his wife. And she's not a very pleasant person from what he says. But I'm a listening ear, and everybody needs a listening ear. In fact, I think there's something in the Bible about bearing one another's burdens, and I'm bearing Frank's burdens. This is a religious thing, just sitting here with him at dinner, listening to him talk about his family and his wife, and I'm probably going to get extra credit in heaven someday for being a good friend and just going, oh, Frank. And I never even patted his hand one time because, we're just friends having dinner. And then eventually that leads to this other, and so you already know where this is going, right? But at any point in the story, if you'd stopped Frank and Sheila and said, hey, what are you, they would have said, we're not doing anything wrong. We've not crossed any lines. We've not crossed any moral boundaries. There's not been anything. We've not done anything wrong. But you hear the story and you kind of already know where it goes, So one night, she invites him in. I'm just going in. People go in all the time. Nothing wrong with going in. Haven't you gone in? Everybody, we've all gone in someone's home at some point. There's nothing wrong with going in somebody's home. There's no laws, never heard a sermon against it. I bet, everybody's gone in. And we're just, all it is go in, right? And what's a hug? Come on, one hug. Everybody hugs. I've seen people at church hug. Everybody hugs. There's nothing. You see, it goes on and on. Here's my point. That every wrong decision we make morally, every time, our wrong moral decisions are always introduced through a series of unwise decisions. And we justify our unwise decisions with this justification. But there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. I'm not doing anything wrong. You see, is it the wrong thing to do is the wrong question to ask. That's why the best question of all is what is the wise thing to do. Because the wise thing to do will lead you away from moral disaster. We know that. You see, when you've been in a situation where you found yourself gone too far in a relationship, maybe it's just emotionally, maybe it's a little bit physical, not all the way physical, but way too physical considering you're married or he's married or he's just not the right kind of person. Or suddenly you're sitting at the computer filling your mind with stuff and all of a sudden you can't turn it off and then you're realizing, I'm addicted to looking at pictures. Tobacco I understand and alcohol I understand. Even chocolate I understand, but I'm addicted to pictures. How did I get myself into this, you wonder? It's very simple. You got yourself into that or you got yourself into a relationship or almost a relationship the same way everybody does. By a series not of immoral decisions, but a series of unwise decisions that led you to the brink of moral disaster, and then it took very little to push you over the edge. And when you find yourself saying, how did this happen? The answer is always the same. You ignored the principle of wisdom. You justified it because every step up to the brink of disaster was okay. It was right. It wasn't wrong. But you were asking the wrong question. And consequently, you were in the wrong place, the wrong time, maybe with the wrong people. Now, this is completely understandable, right? Because there is in me and there is in you a desire to know exactly where the line is at every level of life and to live there, right? If the speed limit's 65, you don't drive 55 just to be careful. We live on the line. In every arena of life, if I'm supposed to be home at 6 o'clock, I time it to get home at 6 o'clock. If I need to be somewhere at 8 o'clock, I time it to get there at 8 o'clock. If you're on a diet and you're only eating so many calories, you just go, hey, I think I can have one more French fry, honey. Cut it in half, but I want to get right to the limit, Curfew, if you're a teenager, curfew, you don't plan to get home 30 minutes early. You're just pulling in the parking lot at 80 miles an hour and slamming on the brakes. Made it. Because we just want to live on the line. But here's the deal, and you know this. Listen. Here's the deal. You see, if the issue is curfew and I'm 5 minutes late, there are no great consequences to that. If the issue is I'm supposed to be home at 6 o'clock for dinner and I get home at 6:10, there are no big consequences. I cross the line, no big deal. If you're counting calories, you're on some kind of diet, and you move past the limit or you eat something you're not supposed to eat, no big, huge consequence. Life goes on, right? But you cross certain lines morally, and you pay for it, potentially, the rest of your life. And even though there's this propensity in me and in you to know where the line is and to live on the line in most arenas of life, that's really not all that dangerous. But in this particular arena of life, it means sometimes that kids grow up without a dad in the home. The kids grow up wondering which weekend they're with mom. It means that men completely lose their focus and are unable to do what they're supposed to do at work or home because their mind is so preoccupied with the stuff they filled their mind with. It means that people live with unbelievable secrets and guilt, and there's walls, and relationally there's always a disconnect. It potentially means that people live their whole life and never experience intimacy the way God designed you to experience intimacy, because one weekend, one spring break, one season of life, you lived over the line. And as much as you regret it, and as much as you've repented, and as much as you've said you're sorry, you cross certain lines morally. I mean, you know this, we're adults. And sometimes you pay for a long time. Now, with that in mind, use your imagination with me one more time. With that in mind, if you were God and you loved you, if you were God who created sex, and there's a whole sermon, right? Once upon a time there was none, and God said, "Oh, he's got the best idea," I mean, you're God and you created it. Okay, so God's not against sex. It's a creation. He created it and He gave it to you and He gave it to me. It's a gift, our sexuality. Just for a moment, if you were God and you through history had seen all the devastation caused by people abusing this gift, you'd seen all the children who grew up in confusion because of abuse of this gift, you'd seen all the little girls who struggled with morality when they got older because of what was handed down to them by mom and dad not being there and doing what they were supposed to do, and dad not building in and developing, nurturing a little girl. All the guys that grew up unfocused, you've seen everything there is to be seen, what happens when people abuse this incredible gift. You're God for a moment, and you love you. And you know that this isn't playing with fire figuratively, this is playing with fire literally. And you know your potential for evil, and you know your potential for good, and you're God for a moment, and you love you, and you have a plan for your life, just for a moment. What would you say to you about this issue of immorality? Can I tell you what you would say to you? You would say, "Run! Because I see what you don't see. And while you're busy, talking, living, talking, living, a car is coming. And I don't have the time, and I don't have the space, and I don't have the margin to explain everything to you because you're not old enough or wise enough to understand it anyway. Just trust me. Run!" And some of us run because we trust our Heavenly Father. And others of us, like little children, say, "Now what?" You see, as a parent, and if you're a parent, you can relate to this. How many times have I tried to warn my kids and I overwarned them? I overwarned them from their perspective because, "Dad, why are you yelling? Dad, why are you so upset? Dad, why did you grab me? Dad, why did you scare me?" And the answer is because I'm informed and you're not. Because I see what you don't see. Because I see your potential for good, and I see what could happen to you if you eat that, touch that, go there, play with that, stay there for too long. I know and you don't. And because of what's about to happen to my little sons or my little girl, I don't have any choice at times but to seemingly overreact in order to protect them from what they do not understand and do not know. And so if you loved you like your Heavenly Father loves you, and if He had a plan for your life that's as wonderful as potentially He has a plan for your life, and He sees you on the verge of about to throw it away because of a relationship or something you fill your mind with, if you were God, what would you say to you? Might want to think about that. No, you would say, "Run, run, run, run." You see, here's why this is important. If you're here today and you're not really a religious person, you're not a Christian, and one of your reasons for not being a Christian or kind of throwing off the whole religious thing is this whole sex thing. Because in your mind, and this is understandable, culture has basically said religious people are against sex, religious people are against sexuality, religious people are against anything to do with any of that, and religion is anti all that. Well, nothing could be further from the truth because we worship the God that created it. You've got to keep that in mind. That's sort of the baseline for all of this. God gave this. We believe God created it and gave it to us. But He gave it to us with parameters because it's an awesome thing, but it's an awesome thing that used incorrectly can result in awesome consequences. If you're not a religious person, here's what you need to understand. The Bible says what it says about sex, not because God is against it, but because He's for it. That the Bible says what it says about sex, not because He's against you, but because He's for you. That God has connected sex with this amazing thing called intimacy. And intimacy is the ultimate experience. And you can't experience intimacy except the way God set it up for you to experience it. And a big part of experiencing intimacy within a marriage has to do with sex. And you fool around with this unbelievable gift and abuse it, you hurt yourself. And if you were God and loved you the way that God loves you, and if you were God and knew all the amazing and potential consequences of abusing this incredible gift, what else could you possibly say to you? What else would we expect our Heavenly Father to say except, run? Not because I'm against something, but because I'm for something. I'm for you. And so throughout the Old and New Testament, over and over and over, prophets and teachers and apostles and letter writers and Jesus Himself said, when it comes to this thing, don't dance on the line. Because if you dance on the line, you pay a price. If you have your Bibles, I just want to read you 2 verses today. Actually, one verse. It's one verse. 1 Corinthians 6:18. I'll put it on the screen in just a moment. 1 Corinthians 6:18. This is some verses, or a verse from a letter that Paul, who was a Jewish man who wrote a lot of letters to Christians during his lifetime in the first century, he wrote a letter to a church in Corinth. And so they call it 1 Corinthians because there's 2 of these letters. And in 1 Corinthians he writes a letter, and he writes to a very pagan culture where immorality is just everywhere. And he says to them in no uncertain terms, it's as if he says, okay, let me make it as clear as I can make it. Let me say it as succinctly as I can make it. Let me speak for God for just a moment in no uncertain terms. And here's what God says to you about sexual immorality. Here we go. Ready? Verse 18, 1 Corinthians 6:18. Pretty clear. Here we go. Ready? Flee from sexual immorality. Are there any questions? Any point of clarification? Do I need to elaborate on that? Flee. That's sort of the proper Bible way of saying, run! When you see it coming, when you see her coming, when you see it coming, when it's coming, when you see the whole deal going that way and it's approaching you and you're moving to the danger zone, don't go, wow, that could be dangerous. Don't sit around and wait for an explanation. He says in as intense a term as he can, run from sexual immorality. Don't flirt with it. Don't gaze. Don't get as close as you can. Don't ask, where's the line? I'm not doing anything wrong. He says, no. Because of what's at stake. You need to run. You see, when you begin to ask morally, what is the wise thing to do? In light of this verse, suddenly it will become all too clear how you're to deal with this issue. He goes on and he gives us the reason. This is one of the best verses in the New Testament. It is so deep and it is so rich. And I think in the field of modern psychology and psychiatry, they're still unpacking the truth behind this verse. They haven't seen the verse yet, but they're still unpacking human sexuality and the consequences of certain things. And 2,000 years ago, the Apostle Paul laid it out for us in one simple statement. Look what he says. Flee from sexual immorality. Why? Because all other sins, in other words, sexual sin is in a category all of its own. All other sins a man or woman commits are outside of his body, but he who sins sexually sins against his own body. In other words, he's alluding to, and he's basically saying what we know from different experiences and in different terminology, that there's something unique about sexual sin. And we can pretend like it's the same as stealing a box of Baby Ruths, when we were 14 years old. And we can pretend it's the same as the little misdemeanors. We can pretend it was like that time you got caught doing. We can pretend that it's all the same category. But what you know and what I know and what experience tells us as we look at people around us that we know, is that there is something unique about sexual sin, that sexual sin, as he says, is a sin against yourself. This is his way of saying this. Whereas you may have done a lot of wrong things in a lot of different categories, eventually you can find forgiveness with God, and eventually you can forgive yourself, and eventually you can put it behind you, and eventually you can even laugh about it, how silly and how dumb you were, and oh, you're glad that's in the past. But sexual sin is different. Sexual sin is like honey. It just seems to stick. That no matter how many times you pray, no matter how assured you are that God has forgiven you, so oftentimes it's the memories, it's the relationship, it's the emotion, it's the scars, it's the struggle with intimacy that follows a person all the way potentially through their life. When anyone comes to me and says, Andy, I've done something I'm having a hard time forgiving myself for, 100% of the time, it's sexual. 100% of the time. I've known people who've done all kinds of horrible things. But once they've paid the price to society, once they've paid the person back, they're able to put it behind them and move on. But there's something about sexual sin that is so complex and so complicated because it's not just physical. It attaches itself to the human soul, to the heart. And unfortunately, in some cases, it follows a person throughout their life. Not because God doesn't forgive, but because for some reason, it's the category that we have the most difficult time forgiving ourselves. So if you were God, what would you say to you? You'd say, run, 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 because I know what's at stake. And you know enough of what's going on in culture to know what's at stake. So don't flirt with it. Flee. Run. Now, what does that look like? How do you do that? I want to give you a suggestion. The way you flee from sexual immorality, regardless of how old you are, if you're a teenager, a middle schooler, or adult or single adult, and maybe you're recently divorced or you've been divorced for a while and you're dating again, no matter where you are, do you know how you flee from sexual immorality? It's not easy to do, but it's simple to do. You set standards for your conduct in your life that are so high, and you set standards that are so far back from the edge, that if you were to violate or compromise your standard, there would be no consequences. That is, you set standards that are so far back from the edge. This is as far as I'll go. This is the only kind of stuff I'm going to look at. This is the only time I'm going to watch. This is the only kind of person I'm going to be with. These are the only circumstances that I'll be with him or be with her. You set standards that are so high and so far back from the edge that if you were to violate your standard, there would be no consequence. That's how you flee immorality. I'll give you an example. Years ago, when I was first married, I made some decisions as it relates to this principle. And one of the things I decided is that I'll never go to dinner or have a meal alone with a woman other than Sandra, unless there's a group. And secondly, that I would never ride in a car alone with a woman that wasn't my wife. That was just a decision. Now, I know that's kind of silly and extreme, and you can laugh about that over lunch, make fun of me. That's okay. I'm up for that. That was the decision I made. And you know what? For years and years and years, never compromised. It made for some awkward situations. Hey, can I give you a ride? No, I'll walk. Are we going to take 2 cars? We'll take 2 cars. I mean, just hey, could we have lunch sometime? No. Dinner? No. Breakfast? No. No. Ever? Not ever. I can never have a meal with you? Never. What's wrong with you? Nothing's wrong with me. It's just a decision I've made. Well, that seems ridiculous. That's fine. That's just my rule. Extreme? Absolutely, it's extreme. Well, about a year ago, I went to Dallas with Sandra to be at a leadership conference, to speak at a conference, and this group wanted me to come a day early and go to some radio stations and talk about what we were going to talk about at the conference. And I said I'd be happy to do that. And they said they'd have a driver and somebody take me around to all these stations. I said that's fine. I assumed it would be a guy. I don't know why I assumed that. I didn't check. I didn't make a point to ask. It was a company that set this up. So Sandra stayed in the hotel. She was going to go shopping with a friend in Dallas. I was going to get up early. Sure enough, I got up, got dressed, went down to the lobby, and I went out where they pick you up in front of the hotel. And there was this nice white Lexus and this woman in the car. I thought, well, there's a nice white Lexus with a woman in the car. I wonder where my ride is. And I stood there waiting, and she kept kind of looking, and I stood there waiting, and finally she got out of the car, and she said, "Are you Andy Stanley?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." I didn't say ma'am because she wasn't that old. And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, and then she said this. She said, "I'm your escort." I thought, it's bad enough it's a woman. Now she's going to be my escort. And here's my point. All of a sudden, I felt very uncomfortable. Why? Because it was a sin to get in the car with a woman? It ain't no sin. Because, I'd done something wrong because I needed to feel guilty? No, here's my point. For years, I had a standard. And when you set a standard, you tune your conscience into your personal standard. And when you violate your personal standard, your conscience goes, ding. And all of a sudden, there's a point of conflict. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you're being forced or tempted to compromise your standard. So what did I do? I got in the car with her. And we drove off. And I felt weird. I felt so weird. And we got to the first stop, and I got out of the car and got on the phone and called Sandra. I said, "Sandra, it's a woman." She said, what? I said, they sent a woman to pick me up. And we just kind of laughed and thought how insensitive and da-da-da-da-da and told Sandra I'm driving all day. And you know what? Everywhere we went, the funniest thing, we'd go to these radio stations or television stations, and we'd get out of the car, and I wanted to go up to everybody and say, now, I don't normally ride around a car with a woman, okay? I wanted to tell everybody the whole story. Now, do you think they cared? No. Do you think they thought anything about it? No. Do you think anybody went inside and said, I can't believe Andy Stanley's riding around the car with a woman? Now, it never even registered on anybody's moral scale but mine, because I had a standard. And I was uncomfortable the whole day. And I got to tell you, as weird as that may sound to you, I'm glad I felt uncomfortable. That's the value of setting a standard. That's how you walk wisely. What is the wise thing to do in light of how people get involved with people they shouldn't be involved with? What's the wise thing to do in light of the fact that it's so easy to fill our minds, men, with stuff we don't need to fill our minds with? What is the wise thing to do? And the only way to follow through and apply that is to set standards that are so high, so far back from the edge, that if you were to compromise, there would be no consequences. There were no consequences to that day, except I felt very uncomfortable. You need to set some standards. If you're a teenager, you know what you need to decide? You need to decide how far you're going to go physically with the people you date. If you don't decide, somebody will decide for you. If you don't have standards, somebody else's lack of standards will force you beyond maybe what you're comfortable with. You need to have standards. You need to write them down. I've spent years and years talking to teenagers about this. To walk wisely, you've got to decide. You know where the line is. How far back from the line do you want to stay? You need to decide. You need to write it down. And then you need to tell a friend. You say, well, Andy, that's just so silly, and I'll be the only one. So what? So what if you're the only one? That's not an argument. That's just a statement. I'll be the only one. And? That's not an argument for or against anything. That's just a statement. You won't be the only one. But hey, even if you are, so what? I will make you this promise. You set standards. You stick to your standards. You will never, ever, ever, ever regret that for as long as you live. But today, if you were to interview every adult in this room, most of us would look back and say, I wish my standards had been higher. I wish I had had standards. Nobody in this room would celebrate the fact that they just did whatever they felt like doing with whoever they were with. No adult celebrates that from their past. Teenagers, you need to have standards. You know what? If you're single, same thing. And this sounds so trite. You say, well, now I'm 25. I'm 30 years old. I'm 19 years old. I'm 42 years old, single. I'm supposed to have standards? Absolutely. Because you've got to ask the question, in light of my past experience, current responsibilities, and future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing to do? And the only way to stay away from the brink of disaster morally is to set standards and to set up some guardrails far back from the edge. And in fact, I'd say this. Again, this is just my opinion, based on lots of conversations. If you're single and you've been sexually active in the past in dating relationships, your standards have got to be higher than the 15-year-old and the 16-year-old who has no experience to drive them past the normal boundaries in a dating relationship. In fact, one of the things I say all the time, you've heard it before, when men and women come to me and they said, I've been married before, and I'm divorced, recently divorced. I've been very sexually active in dating relationships, and I'm trying to get my life right, and I want to do this God's way, and it's just so difficult. Andy, what do you suggest? I say, it's not easy, but it's simple. Just get your calendar out. Go out a year from today and put a big X and say, on this day, a year from now, I will begin dating again. But for a year, I'm just staying completely out of the environment that could lead me to the brink of where I don't want to go. Most people laugh and ignore me. But every single time I've ever said that publicly, every single time, this past week I heard it again. People will come up to me and say, Andy, I got that CD. Somebody gave me that CD. I was there the Sunday you talked about that. I went home, I got my calendar, I marked an X, and for a year I've not dated, and God has changed my heart and my attitude toward men. God has changed my heart and attitude toward women. God has changed my whole mind about sexuality. I'm a completely different person. I feel like now for the first time I can date with pure motives. But it took a year. You say, Andy, is that a rule? Is that a law? Is there a verse about that? No. It's just an answer to the question for you, in a lot of past experience, current circumstances, future hopes and dreams. What is the wise thing for you to do? Hey, single guys, let me confess something to you. Because of the issues of what goes in our mind, sticks in our mind, and because it's such an issue in terms of images and pictures and what's available, did you know, and again, this is extreme. I'm not asking you to follow my example. I never owned a television set until I got married on purpose. Never owned one. I can't tell you how many people kept trying to give me televisions. I had this really nice condominium in Vinings, and they'd come over, and I had this great furniture my mom helped me buy, and they'd say, "Where's the television?" I'd say, "I don't have one." "Hey, we got a 27-inch television." I'd go, "I don't want it." I mean, I even had a cabinet for television. My mom helped me buy this really nice cherry cabinet, open it up, it's empty. And people thought I was a freak. I promise. "You don't have it." They were look, "You don't have a television?" Ugh. I'm going, "No." And you know what? I'm still a pretty relevant contemporary guy without a television. "Why don't you have a television?" I just wouldn't tell them the truth. I'd say, "I just don't want one." You know what? I got to tell you, I didn't trust me as a single guy with a television. Now let me ask you a question. Do you think I regret that? Do you think I was going, if only, because I didn't get married till I was 30, if only I could have gone those 10 years of being single and had a television. Oh, my life would be richer. Think of all the games I missed. Think of the news. Oh, no wonder I'm just so out of touch with reality. No television. How did I do it? You're saying, "Andrew, you telling me to get rid of my TV?" No. I'm just saying, in light of your past, your present, your future, what is the wise thing to do? And I promise you, you will not regret extreme measures. Because you live in a culture like I do that baits me and tempts me and baits me and tempts me to the edge. And then when I step over the edge or you step over the edge, that same culture condemns us. And you say, "Wait a minute, I did what I did and looked at what I looked at and went where I went because culture took me there. Now culture condemns me." Yeah, it's the trap. It's the lie. You got to take extreme measures. If you're married, let me ask you 2 questions that'll tell you where you need to set your guardrails. Ready? Married men and women? Let me ask you this. How extreme do you want, not you, how extreme do you want your spouse to be when it comes to protecting himself or herself from unnecessary temptation in this arena? How far do you want your husband or wife to go in terms of protecting themselves morally? How far? I know the answer. You'd say, "Well, far." Really, really, really far. In fact, I want my husband or wife, I want them to go far, far in protecting themselves from unnecessary sexual temptation. Well, then let me ask you, isn't that the standard for you as well? Let me ask you another question. If you're married, how far would you be willing to go to protect your children from the shrapnel of a marriage that blew up? You got to go that far. Can I tell you where affairs start? This is my own list from my own experience and talking to lots of people. Chatting online with members of the opposite sex, is that wrong? No. Is it wise? You better decide. Meals with members of the opposite sex, is that wrong? I don't think it's wrong. Is it wise? You got to make up your mind. Working late with members of the opposite sex, and everybody's getting in the office, and there's chemistry, and there's energy, and we're all working toward the same goal, and you never thought he was that handsome before, but he's such a good leader, and you never thought she was that attractive, but it's late, and everything's kind of... Personal trainers, the opposite sex. "Oh, Andy, he's just or she's just..." Hey, I'm just telling you the stories I hear. Confiding in friends about personal problems. Hey, if you've got a friend who's a member of the opposite sex, you're a guy and she's a woman, or vice versa, and he or she's trying to tell you all about their dysfunctional marriage, just look at them and say, "Hey, get a life." You see, well, that'll hurt their feelings. Hurt their feelings, but don't hurt your marriage. Come on. Tell them to get a counselor. You're not a counselor. Tell them to go get a different friend. But confiding in members of the opposite sex about what's going on in your marriage is none of their business. And it sets you up for a level of intimacy you have no business entering into. The last one, I hate to even say this. This is so obvious, but I'm just amazed at people. Guys going to clubs with other guys saying, "Oh, we're just looking." That's not a big deal. Guys, that's a pathway. That leads somewhere. And you may be on the first 30 feet of the pathway, but it leads somewhere. It leads somewhere here that eventually goes here. Don't deceive yourself. How in the world, see, this is why the question is so penetrating. If you ask yourself, not is it wrong to go to clubs with my guy friends, hey, is it wise? And you go, well, I hate that question. I like, is it legal? It's legal. Is it wrong? I don't know if it's wrong. Is it cultural? Yeah, everybody's doing it. No, it's why. And the other one, and the last one is this. I've been personally involved with more marriages that blew up over this last one than anything else, believe it or not. It's girls who go dancing with their girlfriends because their husbands don't like to dance. And since the husband doesn't like to dance, he says, you go ahead and dance. And she goes off with friends to clubs and dance. Anything wrong with dancing? I don't think so. Anything wrong with going to clubs and dancing? I don't think so. Anything illegal? But let me just tell you, ladies, it's extraordinarily unwise. And you know what? You know that. You know that. But you justify it like we justify all these things. But there's nothing wrong. I'm not going to do anything. I don't plan to. I don't plan to. I don't plan to. Woo, who's that? I don't plan to. I don't plan to. He's looking at me. I don't plan to. I don't plan to. He's coming this way. I don't plan, All I'm saying is this. I know this is tough. To what degree are you willing to go to protect what's most important to you? And you don't protect it on the line. You protect it back at awkward, unreasonable, extreme distances. Not because it's right, but because it's wise. Now let me close with this. I've talked to so many people, and you have friends where you've had these same conversations, I know. I've talked to so many people who got themselves in a mess morally, got themselves in a mess relationally, went too far. We haven't had sex, but it's it's involved and it's emotional. I'd rather be with her than home. You've had friends, or maybe you've been there. You've had friends that have gotten involved in all kinds of addictions that are related to this subject. And here's what I've heard over and over and over. Here's what you've heard. Here's what some of us have said. On the other side of that terrible decision, when we finally went over the line, when we finally went too far, when things finally started unraveling at the seams, here's what we hear. Here's what maybe you've said. Ready? I would do anything. I would do anything. I would do anything to be able to go back and undo what I've done. I would do anything. In other words, I would go to extreme measures if it was possible and necessary to reverse the process that has led me to where I am. I would do anything not to be in this relationship. I would do anything if I hadn't gone. I would do anything if I hadn't started down that road. In other words, on the other side of the line of morality, it's amazing the extremes to which people would be willing to go to unravel themselves out of the mess they've created. So here's my question. Why not be extreme on this side in reality? Instead of running the risk of wishing we would have been extreme on this side of a poor moral choice. If the consequences are extreme, then why not make some what seem like extremely narrow decisions in order to protect us from circumstances that will cause us to say, I would make extreme decisions now if I thought it would reverse the process, the relationship, and the consequences. Because either way, we either have extreme regret or we have unreasonable extreme standards. And as for me, for now, I've chosen to be a little odd, a little strange, caused there to be some awkward moments. And frankly, I don't really care what you think. And that's the place we've all got to get to if we're willing to ask the question in this arena. Not for you, not for every guy, not for every single guy, not for every married, for me, for you. As you think through this grid, for me, what is the wise thing to do? In light of my past experience, my current responsibilities, my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? And if you'll ask that question and follow through, God will lead you to a place of safety. He'll lead you to a place of safety. And in the future, you won't allow this culture to steal from you your hopes and your dreams, because you will have done the wise thing. And when you see those environments and those people and those temptations coming, you'll take God's advice seriously. He'll say, run! And you'll say, I'm running! He'll say, run, and you'll say, I'm with you. He'll say, run, and you'll go, I got you. I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to compromise. I'm not going to go. But why? I'm just going to run because I trust you. I've seen enough. I've experienced enough. And I'm willing to walk wisely. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, I know this is uncomfortable for some of us. Please help us not to argue. Father, please give us the courage to just face up to what we've heard and what we've felt. And Father, give us the wisdom to ask the question and to follow through. Father, for the men here today who are dancing on the edge, just give them the courage to step back. For the women here, Father, who emotionally are dancing on the edge, give them the courage to step back. For the teenager, Father, who's just allowed culture to sweep him or her along, give them the courage to stand with their face to the wind and to say, I don't care. I don't care what everybody thinks. It's my life. God has given me one opportunity. I want to get it right. Father, just give us the courage in the face of the onslaught of culture to find a safe place and to stand there and to refuse to move. For the sake of our marriages, our kids, our future marriages, our future kids, just give us the wisdom to ask the question and to answer it honestly.